For those of you familiar, I don't think it's any secret that the Yu-Gi-Oh anime loves using this one trope. Every character has, or at some point, will have some kind of sad or dark backstory that drives them to continue to their goals. The series throughout its lifespan is synonymous with this, but I was just thinking, throughout the entirety of Duel Monsters, how many different backstories could you actually make? And since there isn't an easy and comprehensive guide already on the internet, I'm going to do it for you. Every backstory of every character who has appeared in any episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. Now before I go on, here are the ground rules. Number 1, I will be counting any character who appears in the 224 episodes of Duel Monsters, the 12 episodes of Capsule Monsters, and the 3 main movies. That's Pyramid of Light, Bonds Beyond Time 3D, and The Dark Side of Dimensions. We are ignoring Season 0. Number 2, I will only include characters that have their backstories explained during flashback sequences, and said flashback sequences cannot reuse animation from an older Duel Monsters episode. And finally, number 3, purely for the sake of my own amusement, I am going to cover backstories exactly as they are told in the infamously censored 4Kids dub of Duel Monsters. All backstories are mostly the same, but there are parts where you're free to take things with a little grain of salt. Since 4Kids lost the license to Yu-Gi-Oh! Before the Dark Side of Dimensions movie, I'll cover the English cinematic dub by Konami. You got all that? Then let's start. Beginning things simple, Joey Wheeler. His sister Serenity is slowly going blind and he wants to win the prize money from the Duelist Kingdom tournament so he can pay for the operation to fix her. From the same episode, we also get Yugi's backstory. Yugi got bullied a lot, but mostly by Joey and Tristan. One day, an even bigger bully stepped in and started beating up on Joey and the T-Dog, but Yugi, defying all logical reasoning, stood up for them. Yugi then got the shit beaten out of him, but this is how Yugi, Joey and Tristan all became friends. This is a Season 0 plot point, but read the rules. Jump forward to find Mako Tsunami. While out at sea with his father, a giant storm appeared. Daddy Tsunami tied Mako down, but his father didn't have enough time for himself, so when the storm hit the boat, Mako's dad was gone. Believing he's still out there somewhere because the lifeboat was missing, Mako wants to win the Duelist Kingdom tournament so he can buy a better boat in order to search the seas for his father. Furthermore, later in the show, Mako gets an anonymous letter from someone with a Duel Monsters card included telling him to never give up. Believing this to be his father's letter, Mako continues to wait for him. You're going to be waiting a long time for that body to wash ashore, mate. On the subject of absent fathers, there's also Bakura, who says that his dad found the Millennium Ring, one of 7 Millennium items, at an Egyptian merchant's and bought it as a present. Now the spirit inside the ring has possessed Bakura and it wants all 7 Millennium items to conquer the world. Because of course. Next we got Bandit Keith. In the finals of the Intercontinental Duel Monsters Championship, Pegasus embarrassed him by showing the huge crowd that even a child could beat him. Keith cheats his way through Duelist Kingdom so he can get revenge on Pegasus, which, spoiler alert, doesn't work. Then there's Seto and MOKUBA KAIBA. Both their parents died. That's literally all they say. You find out they were sent to an orphanage and a lot more later on, but for the time being, let's try to keep things chronological. Taya GARDNER. After receiving a note from Yugi, she goes to an abandoned warehouse that she may want to use as a dance studio. As it turns out, this letter was a fake and some guy starts harassing Taya before Yugi jumps in and saves her. On to MAXIMILLION Pegasus. Shortly after marrying his wife, she contracted an unnamed illness and died. Now he plans to attain all 7 Millennium items so he can bring her back to life. Well, zombies have got to be someone's fetish. Duelist Kingdom has now ended and we get some extra filler until Season 2. This is where we discover that Solomon Moto, aka Yugi's grandpa, was trapped inside an ancient Egyptian tomb with Arthur Hawkins while researching the Shadow Games. This is the scene where Solomon gets given the Blue Eyes White Dragon card, which causes Arthur's granddaughter Rebecca to want to win the card back because she thought it was stolen by Solomon. One backstory for 3 characters. That is efficiency I will envy later in this video. After Arthur and Rebecca, we have the next virtually pointless character, Duke Devlin. He created the game Dungeon Dice Monsters and set up a deal with Pegasus to publish the game. Unfortunately, the Duelist Kingdom tournament happened before any official contract was written, and Pegasus was somewhat almost dead because of events caused by Bakura. The problem is, Duke hadn't met Bakura yet and he doesn't believe Pegasus could ever lose a duel, so he thinks Yugi cheated at the tournament and Devlin is now looking for revenge. Your game was shit anyway, Duke. Even I didn't want it. Now we're at Season 2. We start off with the return of Bandit Keith. Not much of a backstory, but it is there. As punishment for threatening Pegasus in the Duelist Kingdom tournament, he was sent drifting out at sea. He was then found by an unnamed character and became their mind slave. This mind-controlling character's name was MARIK ISHTAR. He is one in a long line of tomb keepers guarding the pharaoh's tomb. He gets bored of this and generally dislikes the pharaoh, so he decided to steal the 3 Egyptian god cards which he feels are rightfully his. Marik's sister, Ashizu, also gets tied up in this as she steals 1 Egyptian god card before Marik can get to it. This god card is Obelisk the Tormentor, which Ishizu lets Seto KAIBA borrow, secretly using him to host the Battle City tournament where all 3 god cards will be collected in one place. Then there's Marik's friend ODION. He was adopted by the Tomb Keepers before the Ishtar siblings were born. After Marik was born, as the oldest blood-related son of the family, he was destined to take the title of Tomb Keeper, with ODION being his protector until that time. Marik didn't want to be a Tomb Keeper, so ODION asked to take his place, to which the father refused. Marik's dad is a bit of a cunt. After Marik's initiation into the Tomb Keepers, ODION said that he would stay by Marik's side as a friend. But in reality, we get shown a couple episodes later that Marik has a much eviler side that ODION, through his own initiation, has the power to suppress. After Marik experienced the outside world and came back, Daddy Ishtar knocked ODION unconscious, which released Marik's dark half. Now motivated by evil, Marik kills his father. Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, sends his father to the Shadow Realm. Because of this, Ishizu starts to use the Millennium Necklace, one of 2 Millennium items held by the Tomb Keepers, which lets her see into the future where she sees visions of Marik taking actions to ruling the world, thus beginning the events of Battle City. With Daddy Ishtar being out of the picture, Marik goes about his quest for the 3 Egyptian god cards, ODION follows him, and Ishizu tries to stop them. Also, in Marik's initiation, he had the memories of the pharaoh tattooed on his back. It's literally a story on his back! Come on guys, that's a clever pun! Then there's the rest of Season 2, which thankfully is a bit simpler. There's ARKANA, who was a successful magician with a fiancée named Catherine. After an accident with an escapology trick, ARKANA was badly injured and his face was disfigured. Not wanting Catherine to see him like this, he drove her away, but regretted doing so later as he realised she would have stood by him no matter what. Marik finds this weakness in ARKANA and manipulates him to duel Yugi. You know, ARKANA, if you were a real magician, you should be able to fix your face easy. Next we got my Valentine, whose parents were constantly moving house, meaning she didn't make any friends. Her parents also worked a lot at the time, meaning she was alone for most of her life. But she wouldn't be alone if she went along with JEAN-CLAUDE MAGNUM. I cannot believe 4 kids got away with that name and yet somehow weren't allowed to show violence. After losing to Mai in a game of Duel Monsters, Jean proposed marriage pretty much instantly. Mai refused, saying, "Ask me again when you can beat me in a game of Duel Monsters," but Magnum didn't realise she was being sassy. God, talk about clingy. So that's the entirety of Battle City and Duelist Kingdom covered. Now, what I like about these backstories is that they all come from a place that feels like human problems, for the most part. They're realistic goals in unrealistic situations. Now, with that in mind, who wants to hear the backstories from the virtual world and Waking the Dragons arc? Now, just to establish the virtual world story, at the end of Season 1, Seto KAIBA fired his board of executives for trying to overthrow his company when they made a deal with PEGASUS. Apparently at some point their bodies all became trapped inside cyberspace, but they never actually showed it, even in flashbacks. The Big Five, as they now call themselves, trap KAIBA, Yugi and company in a virtual world so they can steal their bodies, but this isn't technically the backstory yet because 3 of the Big Five go even deeper down the rabbit hole. But first we need to address the rest of Seto and Mokuba's backstory. Throughout most of the virtual world arc, they show what happened after the KAIBA brothers were sent to the orphanage. As a little side note before we go into any detail, in Season 3, they changed the fact their parents died to their parents going missing, so I just want you to know that 4 Kids retconned their backstory just a little, even in their own translation. After being sent to the orphanage, they received a visit from leading businessman GOZABURO KAIBA. Seto tricks GOZABURO into a game of chess with the conditions being if Seto wins, then Gozo has to adopt him and MOKUBA or face the embarrassment of people thinking he was scared of a kid at chess. Gozo accepts and of course loses, so he adopts the 2. Gozo, being a bit of a knob, then pushes Seto very hard in his studies. MOKUBA, wanting to help, convinced the KAIBA butler, Hobson, aka Mr. Potato Head's evil twin, to give Seto a textbook that secretly held his deck. Among those cards was a crayon drawing of the Blue Eyes White Dragon that MOKUBA had made. Since then, Seto vowed to be a person worthy of owning a real Blue Eyes White Dragon. After some time, Seto teamed up with the Big Five, promising them what they wanted to try and overthrow GOZABURO. They slowly buy up the company but are 2% below holding a majority. GOZABURO catches on to their plan and tries to fire them, but MOKUBA reveals that he owns 2% of KAIBA Corp. MOKUBA gifts his brother the 2%, which gives Seto the power to fire his dad. GOZABURO was so ashamed that he ran away and no one had heard of him since, although it's later revealed in episode 22 of Season 3 that GOZABURO put his mind into a computer for the purposes of taking revenge on Seto. Remember when this conversation was about the Big Five? We're finally getting back to them now! After the takeover, Seto proceeds to screw over all of them and not give them their promises. Firstly is ADRIAN RANDOLPH CRUMP III, the accountant of the Big Five. He was a lonely child, so to pass the time, he would count random things. One day while counting books, he came across a paragraph that read how mother and father penguins both look after their child. Being jealous of the love penguins give to their kids, he then devoted his life to penguins. After rising up the ranks in KAIBA Corp, he wanted to create a penguin theme park, but Seto KAIBA rejected the idea. I could not say that paragraph with a straight face. It's a guy with a penguin fetish! That is the level of backstory we're getting into! Secondly, Nesbit, technical expert of the Big Five. After Seto's takeover, Nesbit got pissed off that he had to develop gaming software instead of military vehicles. Also, Seto blew up his workshop. Screw the tools, I have money! Third and final backstory of the Big Five is LEICHTER, GOZABURO KAIBA's assistant. In order to inherit the company, GOZABURO KAIBA set Seto the task of turning $10 million into $100 million in 1 year. The only help Seto was allowed to receive was from LEICHTER. Seto asked LEICHTER to find a company that valued its workers and to buy 51%, aka the majority of that company. After doing so, Seto forced the previous owner to buy back the 51% at 10 times the price, or he would dissolve the company and make all the workers jobless. LEICHTER believed he did all the work in this money-making scheme and felt he should be the next rightful heir of KAIBA Corp instead of Seto. I don't know why he thinks this, but he does. And finally in the virtual world arc is Noah KAIBA. Doesn't he look a lot like Seto? Well, forget it, because there's no blood relation. Noah KAIBA is the only biological child of GOZABURO. After being involved in an accident, it was a car accident, but the dub tries to avoid saying he was hit by a car even though the footage makes it clearly obvious, to which his father used his company to save Noah's mind. Noah had his brain linked to a computer which transferred all his memories and knowledge to a virtual version of himself that now exists in a virtual world. After Seto and MOKUBA were adopted, GOZABURO slowly stopped visiting Noah and his chances of becoming heir to KAIBA Corp diminished. Now Noah wants revenge on Seto for taking what he thinks should be his, the leadership of KAIBA Corp. And now here comes the Waking the Dragons arc! If you thought the virtual world got complicated, well, Season 4 is a doozy! First stop is ALISTER. ALISTER lived in a war-torn country with his brother Mikey. After ALISTER's brother and mother were captured in the war, he discovers KAIBA Corp, under management of GOZABURO KAIBA, were responsible for supplying the tanks used in the war. Then Darts, the main antagonist of Season 4, who we'll cover later, convinced ALISTER to take revenge on KAIBA Corp through fighting Seto, who, by the way, was about 8 years old at the time of Mikey's capture. Then we get the return of Mai Valentine. After the Battle City tournament, Mai wanted to make a name for herself. Even though she was virtually undefeated, she was never recognized as being as strong a duelist as Yugi, Joey, or Seto. Feeling defeated without her friends for support and having nightmares of MARIK sending her to the Shadow Realm, she was ready to give up until Valen, another henchman of Darts, appeared to show her how to attain true power by using the Orichalcos. What's the Orichalcos? Oh, don't worry, we'll get to it soon! Firstly, we need to address Raphael. While travelling on the cruise ship with his family at a young age, a tidal wave hit the boat and separated Raphael from his loved ones. He ended up on a desert island and stayed there for 3 years before being saved. In the time he spent on the island, Raphael turned full emo and won't shut up about how lonely the world is and generally just complains a lot. Now seeing the world outside the island as uncivilized, Raphael joins with Darts to try and make the world a better place by eradicating all evil there is, even if his definition of evil is a little bit loose. Honestly, Raphael is such a dumb character. Also, as a side note, he credits his Duel Monsters cards to how he managed to keep his sanity. Yeah, because that's the kind of thing a sane person would say. Then there's Rex, Raptor, and Weevil Underwood. After losing in the first round of Duelist Kingdom, they both lost their fame and fandom. Wanting revenge on Joey and Yugi, they team up with Darts to gain more power and hopefully become famous again. Don't worry about it, Weevil. I won't forget you. It's physically impossible to forget how stupid your voice is. And here's Valen. He went to various detention centers all throughout his youth. At the 13th detention center, he was asked to channel his anger into Duel Monsters cards. This detention center was partnered with Darts' company Paradius, and after Valen showed promise as a duelist in what can only be described as Yu-Gi-Oh! The Hunger Games, Darts granted him freedom from detention as long as he worked for Paradius from now on. I keep mentioning Darts, but who exactly is he? Well, sit tight, ladies and gentlemen. This is the creme de la creme of Yu-Gi-Oh! Backstories. But how can we top the complicated family tree of MARIK, ISHTAR, or Seto KAIBA's revenge spree? Well, Darts is a 10,000-year-old Atlantean king. How's that for an opening statement? Atlantis was a peaceful society until one day, a strange substance known as the Orichalcos stones started raining down. These stones greatly accelerated the technological advancements in Atlantean society, but this caused people to turn to greed and later violence. After some time, the Orichalcos started testing people, and anyone deemed wicked on the inside transformed into hideous beasts. When Darts was tested by the Orichalcos, it showed him how evil the world was and that he believed he should destroy everything to rebuild it anew. The Orichalcos gifted Darts the power of the great Leviathan that lived within the earth, and a full-scale war broke out between Darts trying to destroy the world and his father, Ironheart, trying to save it. Ironheart called upon the 3 sacred dragons to fight against the Leviathan, leaving neither side victorious and Atlantis falling in the aftermath. Darts has spent the last 10,000 years stealing people's souls with the Orichalcos so he can revive the Great Leviathan and finish what he started. Side note, it also turns out that Darts was responsible for manipulating the lives of ALISTER, RAFAEL and Valen, thus creating their backstories. Double side note, the spirits of Ironheart and Darts' daughter Chris roam around the wasteland that is California waiting for a hero to come and stop the Orichalcos. I did not change anything there. Ironheart and Chris probably died in Atlantis but somehow ended up in California. There's something about an ancient spirit ground, but fuck it, season 4 makes no goddamn sense. And here we are at season 5. This is Siegfried von Schroeder. The von Schroeder and KAIBA families were competing businesses for years, with the KAIBA family always being one step ahead. Both Siegfried and his father worked tirelessly to overtake KAIBA Corp, which eventually turned their father insane. Siegfried took control of the business and decided to turn it into a gaming company, with KAIBA Corp coincidentally following the same route at the same time. Determined not to lose to KAIBA Corp, Siegfried worked to create Duel Monsters holographic projections, but yet again, we're one step behind KAIBA Corp. With his company now going under, Siegfried vowed revenge on Seto KAIBA for stealing his idea. An idea that wasn't stolen. Even when he's not trying, Seto KAIBA can piss people off. Then there's Leon Wilson, aka Leon von Schroeder, brother to Siegfried. Leon was neglected by his family as all the focus was on his bigger brother. Leon stayed in his room all day reading fairy tales until he discovered Duel Monsters. He then entered tournaments under a false identity until Siegfried found out what he was doing. Siegfried approached Leon and asked if he could use his talents to assist the von Schroeder business, to which Leon accepted so he could feel part of the family again. Next is Capsule Monsters, which in syndication is technically part of season 5. Only one backstory here, but it's a juicy one. Alexander III of Macedon, better known to most people as history's Alexander the Great. Possessed by the spirit of the Millennium Ring, Alexander the Great was able to conquer the world using its dark forces. When he reached India, he found a pyramid that promised power to anyone who could complete its 5 trials. He did beat the trials, but yet did not receive the power. This filled him up with rage, causing his spirit to split into 2. The good half was trapped inside the alternate world where he faced his trials, and the evil half got trapped inside the pyramid. Cut to roughly 2,000 years later, and a long-lost descendant of Alexander the Great called Alex Brisbane finds the pyramid with Yugi's grandpa. The evil spirit takes hold of Brisbane's body and waits for someone new to clear the 5 trials so he can try to open the door to power again. Also, as another little tidbit, they say in the show that Alexander the Great once met the pharaoh in ancient Egypt, which doesn't make any sense at all considering the 2 characters existed 18 centuries apart, but hey, that's hardly the biggest fault with Capsule Monsters. And now, at long last, the final arc of the show, the Pharaoh's memories. Starting with Mahard, the Pharaoh, even as a prince, has always looked after Mahard even though it was Mahard's job to look after the prince. In order to return the favour to the Pharaoh, Mahard has vowed to always protect him. Short and to the point. That is the backstories I like. Then there's Kisara. While the Egyptian version of Seto KAIBA was out riding his horse, he comes across a band of thugs who ran people out of town and captured prisoners, one of which was Kisara. Egyptian Seto then rescued the girl and gave her his horse so she could go to the next town. This transitions nicely into Seto KAIBA's story, where the same thugs that captured Kisara rampaged his village as well. Next is Akhenaten, along with the Egyptian version of Bakura. Enemies of Egypt declared war and were set to take over the kingdom in just 7 days. This was particularly bad because in Egypt lies the Millennium Spellbook, which is said that whoever can decipher it will have power over the world. Fortunately, Akhenaten was able to translate one spell which tells how to forge the Millennium items. To perform this ritual, he needed to gather the darkness in people's hearts, but he didn't tell the Pharaoh this because he knew the Pharaoh wouldn't approve. This leads Akhenaten to the village of Kalona, where the people regularly steal from the Pharaoh's palace. After Akhenaten's men, and I quote, relinquish the spirits of the Kalona people, the dark energy is used to forge the Millennium items. Worrying people may find out about the horrific deeds Akhenaten performed to save his country, he separated from his family, including his child, the Egyptian version of Seto KAIBA. Even 5,000 years ago, Seto had no luck with parents. Also, bonus point, Egyptian Seto years later managed to become the right-hand man of the pharaoh, and Akhenaten felt that because Seto was able to achieve such greatness without being associated with nobility, that KAIBA should be pharaoh instead. Double bonus point, Akhenaten is brother to the current pharaoh of Egypt, Akhenaten, during the Millennium Items forging, but hates the fact that his brother is so pacifist and generally just jealous of his power. Bandit thief Bakura ties into this because he is the only surviving person from Kalona and he wants revenge on the pharaoh, which by the time he comes of age is Akhenat's son, the pharaoh which inhabits the Millennium Puzzle. That was a mouthful. Nearly there now. Finally, Pharaoh Akhenaten himself. He discovered from Mahard the origins of the Millennium items. Akhenaten starts to feel ashamed that an entire village was destroyed to create peace for his own country. To this, he asks the gods to spare his son for what he considers are his own sins. And there we have it! 4,000 words and 41 characters later, I have covered every flashback sequence backstory for every character that I can. But I said I'd talk about the movies as well, didn't I? Come on, let's go. We got Paradox from Bonds Beyond Time 3D. The world of the distant future is in ruin. So much so that he now wears a mask to not see the world through his own eyes. And I didn't exaggerate that last sentence to make him sound like an emo. Those are the exact words he uses. The world was destroyed because of the Duel Monsters card game, method unspecified, so he travels through time in order to kill Pegasus before he makes the game too influential. I do not even have words for how stupid Paradox or this movie is. Then we jump to the dark side of dimensions to meet Bakura again, this time giving a much more interesting backstory to the Millennium Ring by retconning the previous one. Bakura's dad received word of an artifact located in the Valley of the Kings. Bakura was worried about his dad, so followed behind him in secret. Daddy Bakura found the ring but was warned by a man called Shadi, also known here as Master Shin, that it may consume him. What do you think happened next? Yep, he died! Bakura saw what happened and quickly ran over to his father, picking up the ring in the process. This led to Bakura getting possessed by the Millennium Ring and then killing Shadi. The death of Shadi Master Shin leads to the backstory of Aigami, also known as Diva. After their guardian was killed by Bakura, him and his sister had a pretty hard life, focusing mainly on the fact that they lived with a dickhead who used them to get money for himself. After the events of the final episode of Duel Monsters, Shadi's spirit came back and released Diva and his friends before maybe killing the dickhead. Diva wants to avenge his master and create a world of peace by eradicating evil. Why is it always the bad guys that want to eradicate evil? And there we actually have it. If any of you think I missed anything like Anubis, Esperoba, Vivian Wong, or whoever the hell you can think of, let it be known that while they may have had backstories, they never had flashbacks, so they don't count. One final backstory though. It's me! Between watching 4 months of Duel Monsters and audio editing this video, I want to fucking kill myself!